There's nothing I love more than authenticity, which is why I'm so excited about Salsa de la Viuda hot sauce, which has been on kitchen tables in Mexico since 1956. It will be available here in the U.S. for purchase later this year. In addition to livening up your food, it's Mexican-owned, it's woman-owned, and it's one of the only hot sauce brands to have 100% Mexican-sourced pepper mix. Salsa de la Viuda hot sauce will be available here in the United States to purchase on shelves later this year. Hey there, I'm Lezli Levene Harvell. Welcome to Impolite Conversation, the podcast, curated by the Iconoclast Dinner Experience. I believe the best way to explore a topic in depth is to view it through multiple lenses. Join us as we explore race, culture, and societal issues through the lens of industry experts, writers, cultural critics, and HBCU students. Hello, everyone. We're recording this episode on Tuesday, November 11th, and Joe Biden is president-elect.
Yes.
So we know that the Biden-Harris ticket was supported by various voting blocs. One of the most significant and most influential were Black women. In addition to Black women saving our country yet again, African-American culture helped to deliver this ticket. Today, we're going to explore how the Biden-Harris ticket has permanently etched the significance of particular aspects of African-American culture into this historic win. I'm so excited to do this with a very brilliant Dr. Nadia E. Brown. Nadia is an associate professor and university faculty scholar of political science and African-American studies at Purdue University. Professor Brown is the author of the award-winning Sisters in the State House, Black Women and Legislative Decision-Making, and the lead editor of Politics, Groups, and Identities. In addition to being a Bison, she's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and she's also my line sister. Hi, Nadia. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Lezli. Thrilled to be here.
So, Nadia, for the uninitiated, what's a Bison?
A Bison is an elite graduate of Howard University, the Hilltop, the Mecca, the illustrious HBCU.
Okay, and also Kamala Harris's alma mater as well.
Yes. So Kamala Harris is an alumna of Howard University, but so are lots of other politically active and engaged and notable African Americans, and particularly African American women.
Exactly. And I was also going to say, not a woman, but Thurgood Marshall, our first African American Supreme Court justice. So I'm so excited to have this cultural conversation with you today. So Nadia, 46, Biden-Harris, we know that there was an unprecedented voter turnout. According to many reports, this was the largest voter turnout in 120 years. According to Michael McDonald of the University of Florida, whose U.S. Elections Project tracks voter turnout, more than 160 million Americans voted, which represents 66.9% of the potentially eligible voter population. McDonald said, "This is the largest participation since 1900. And by far the biggest of the modern era." What do you think drove this unprecedented voter turnout?
We're really facing an election, the election season, right? So the cycle is not over. There's still 3 states that are outstanding. So I don't want to put a cap on my remarks to make it seem as if this election is done. And in actuality, things will not be hemmed up until January 20th, until Donald Trump is out of the Oval Office. But this election saw a record number of turnout for a number of reasons. The first is that there never has been, except I would probably harken back to the 1800s around the Civil War. We haven't had a presidential election that the candidates were so stark, had such big differences, right? Where President Lincoln was really fighting to keep the nation together, and his opponent was saying, we can chalk up our losses, and right, we just split into 2 different countries. The other thing is there have been groups of people that have been mobilized in ways that we have never seen before. And this really goes out to Black women, right? Your alumna, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, the Fair Fight, LaTosha Brown, and the New Voter Project. These women are activating new voters, expanding the electorate. So what's different, and why some of these exit poll numbers are off, is because pollsters just weren't asking people if they were going to vote from these kind of demographics, people that we ordinarily don't see engaged in politics, which surprised us all in political science. So for those 2 reasons, that this is very stark contrast in the candidates that were running and the positions that they put forward. And then also the mobilization to expand the electorate is why we saw such huge voter number turnout.
We know Biden beat Trump and Georgia went blue. The last time Georgia went Democratic was in 1992, with Bill Clinton taking 43.47% of the vote to George H.W. Bush's 42.88%. So for 30 years, Georgia has been a red state. In 2018, Stacey Abrams ran against Brian Kemp, then Georgia's Secretary of State for Governor, who lost by fewer than 55,000 votes. Many believe she lost because of racially motivated voter suppression. Subsequent to that loss, Stacey Abrams founded Fair Fight, which is to combat voter suppression. Many people credit Stacey Abrams, a Black woman, a Spelman grad, which is a historically Black college for those who are listening who don't know what Spelman is, for turning this GOP stronghold into a blue state. Do you agree with this? And if so, what do you think the impact is going to be on how both parties view the significance of Black women in carrying or helping to carry national campaigns? And does this translate into political capital within these parties for Black women?
Yeah, so that's a triple loaded question. So the first part, right? Mm-hmm. The Voting Rights Act has been really gutted, right? With the Section 5 of the Pre-Clearance Act being pushed out of this. And this is only our second election since the Voting Rights Act has been gutted. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of this voter suppression because as Democrats recognized in the 1800s and Republicans recognize now in the 2000s, the way to win votes when you don't have the majority of Americans voting for you is through voter suppression. Nothing new under the sun is going on here. It's just not as violent and not as overt, but voter suppression is real. So Black women, like other groups of marginalized voters that we saw turn out in other locations, are really the key vote to securing Democrats in power. And what we will continue to see is while one party doesn't have actual outreach in terms of policy and politics to Black women will be a captured group in the Democratic Party, meaning that they will be, no place else to go, right? If the other party doesn't give you any real reason to support them, then you are stuck with this other party. But that other party still has to work for your vote. And that's what Stacey Abrams and the like have shown, is that when Black women turn out, they are in force. But it's not okay just to say, thank you, and this is a transactional election, and say, I'm going to take your vote. But what can you do for me once I've given you my vote? And that's what I hope we will see coming forward. Particularly in 2018, we saw that Black women were demanding more. And 2020 I term it as the year of Black women candidates. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden last Saturday really got up and said, thank you, Black women. We could not have done this without you in their victory speech. So they recognize they need Black women voters. But what I want to see happen is, well, then put your money behind these women, right? Let the Democratic Party support these women's candidacies. Let the Democratic Party support the issues that Black women prioritize. So it's and both game, not an and or, not a if what, then nothing else will happen.
The GOP does not have any outreach to Black women. Obviously, we're talking about a state, Georgia, that for 30 years was red and was one of the states that essentially pushed Biden over. Do you think there is going to be some GOP outreach to Black women in terms of meaningful outreach? I mean, they have to see that their bench is homogeneous.
So I hope so. The reason why I'm hedging my bets here. So my own research, I find that there are Black women Republicans who are desperate for party support, the same way there are Black Democratic women who are desperate for party support. And the difference is that the Democratic Party at least pays lip service to these women. And then they have some options of moving up the ladder, getting support in other kind of ways. But the Republican Party says the same kind of things, but there's never any meaningful follow-up. The story of 2020 that I would have been talking about to all media outlets, I would have been writing other articles about, and probably would have been a much bigger feature in this book that I'm writing, would have been that 2020 is actually a year of gains for Republican women, and particularly Republican women of color. They're someone that we don't talk about. Or when we do, they're laughed off as being unelectable. But these women are doing this all on their own, right? They are not, oftentimes don't have the support of the National Republican Party. And the couple that have made high profile gains have had support of Donald Trump. So think about Kimberly Klacik in Baltimore was running in Baltimore with a very slim chance, right, giving this deep blue district. And the last 2 years, but particularly this year, there's been an uptick of women of color who are running as Republicans, and their narratives vary. For Black women, one of the ways that they identify with the Republican Party is that they are coming from a military family, or they themselves are former military. They are business owners, usually these small entrepreneurial, like upstart type of things. And then the other category, they are these religious fanatics. So they interpret all political phenomenon through biblical text. And so these women oftentimes aren't as viable because they're running in majority minority districts. And in my own research, I've spoken to women who are Republicans who are running these long shot candidacies. And my question, or what I'm trying to think through, is why do this? Like, why show up? You're not going to get elected, right? Your district that you're running in is never going to represent you. But what I think they're doing, what I'm trying to theorize through, is perhaps they're trying to get the Republican Party to acknowledge them and perhaps appoint them to some sort of leadership role within the party, because they deeply do hold these beliefs, right? They believe in some of the core tenets of republicanism and particularly conservatism, but they are just such long shots. So again, like, I'm trying to think through what the end game might be. And if the Republicans were smart, like you said, they would look at this backbench and they would say, there's folks out here. How can we develop them? How can we use them to our advantage?
I think we're seeing that with Black men in GOP, but not the women.
Yes.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to mention. So my own classmate from Howard University, Jerron Smith, was the top Black staffer in the Trump White House. He recently stepped down right before the election results have formally come out. But we see this as really part and parcel with how Black men are given an opportunity within the Republican Party under the auspices of reasserting patriarchy and being perhaps second in race, but first in gender. And because of this patriarchal norm of a masculinist identity as a party, Black men easily see themselves, or more easily see themselves, as part of this. And to be real, right, I don't want to throw Black men under the bus or ahistoricize this. There's always been tenets of Black conservatism, like as far back, as 1619, when Black folks set a foot on the soil, is that Black folks have had conservative views, usually mandated by religion. But the disconnect here is the policies that are put in place. And Black people vote as a monolith most of the time because they're looking at the goal for the community as opposed to the individual goal of one group of people or their own pocket.
Just on that note, I'll say that one of the rising stars in the GOP is Daniel Cameron, Attorney General from Kentucky, who, to your point about policy, he was essentially the one who decided that the police officers would not be charged with murder in Breonna Taylor's case. Again, right. He's in lockstep with the GOP, but look how that impacts Black people.
And Black women in particular. Yeah. So this is around ways that men are asserting their dominance over women, and particularly Black women.
Another note on Biden's and Harris's victory speeches. They did thank Black women. By all accounts, Joe Biden's Democratic primary candidacy did not begin to get resurrected until the Black primary, colloquially as it's called, began in South Carolina.
Yeah, Black people in South Carolina saved Biden's candidacy. And he knew that. And he said, watch out until South Carolina. I'm behind in Iowa, New Hampshire, these other places, but South Carolina will be the stopgap. And that really is what it was. Joe Biden has a long working relationship with James Clyburn, this godfather of Black politics. And so he knew that this deep-seated relationships and his outreach to Blacks via Barack Obama would be the thing that would catapult him to the presidency.
More impolite conversation in just a moment. The new HBO documentary Yusuf Hawkins, Storm Over Brooklyn, tells the story of Yusuf Hawkins, a Black teenager who was murdered in 1989 by a group of young white men in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. His death and the official response to it sparked outrage in New York.
The film, directed by Muta Ali Muhammad, explores the 30-year legacy of Yusef's murder, and his family and friends reflect on the tragedy and the subsequent fight for justice that inspired and divided New York City. Stream it now on HBO Max. Visit hbomax.com to sign up for your 7-day free trial.
So I want to talk about Stacey Abrams again and what she did in Georgia, and then linking that to South Carolina. Obviously, there are some states, Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina, who I think that there was essentially like a blue mirage in North Carolina and Texas. Stacey Abrams used a very specific strategy in Georgia where she raised $32 million, and that got donated to various Democratic campaigns and their grassroots efforts in Georgia. Do you think that, I essentially call it the Stacey Abrams technique, I'm going to just call it that.
I love that, yes.
Do you think in a state like South Carolina, where the Black primary begins, even a place like Mississippi, which has always been red, but it's predominantly Black,
right?
Do you think the Stacey Abrams technique can be employed and really start to change some of these states from red to blue, and then actually even cementing more of the political power of African Americans, of Black women?
Yeah. I think this is already happening. I think these conversations are already happening because what grassroots voter mobilization outreach does is it doesn't just get people to the polls, but it wakes them up to let them know that their voice matters, that they have a vote, that they have a stake in American politics and policymaking. And this empowerment is what we know Black women do. So we look back to women like Septima Clark, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, who were part of the playbook that Stacey Abrams used to get voters out. It's knocking on doors, it's listening to people, it's talking with them and finding out about the issues that they care about, because that should inform politicians. It shouldn't be the other way around. And once those kind of techniques are used that are this grassroots level of mobilization, listening to people, you can't put that lid back on. People don't go from being woke to unwoke.
Right.
So this is an organic leadership development. This is a way that Black women have shown their indelible spirit in political and American politics. It's about us. It's about we. And what changes then is the dynamics of electoral politics. And this has been a ground game in several states that we would not have thought possible. Georgia turning purple, then turning blue, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, right? All of these, Arizona owes a great deal of gratitude to tribal communities that were doing the same kind of work. New Mexico elected an all-female delegation to Congress who are women of color, and this is because of the work that they have been doing. This is so much more than Republicans or Democrats. These are about women empowering communities, particularly women of color empowering marginalized communities. And that's why we see these numbers turn out the way that they do, right? These women are finding new voters. They're talking to them. They're getting them engaged. And then hopefully, right, my hope is, my prayer is that politicians don't take this for granted, that they thank these communities, they publicly thank them, they acknowledge them, and then they put their policies to work. They try to find ways to make these things a reality in state houses and the federal government.
What cabinet position do you want for Stacey Abrams? There's a meme basically that she is whatever the F she wants. That's her cabinet position.
Yes.
But what would you like to see her as?
Stacey Abrams is a nerd girl. She loves policy, right? So I would see her in doing something that is so hands-on, the technical expertise of understanding how bills are made, the rationale behind some of the policies. I think she can do anything that she wants, but I would want it to really be something that excites her. And as someone who cares deeply about how the sausage is made, I think it's something, a cabinet position that won't be in the public eye, unfortunately.
I don't know about you, but I know for myself, I've never heard the term HBCUs used so much in mainstream culture until this presidential campaign. Going back to 2019, when Senator Harris was a rumored presidential hopeful, she had hosted a book event where it had been reported that this was going to be a soft launch for her campaign. And Washington Post reporter Chelsea Janes, who was covering this event, and she tweeted, quote, Members of her sorority are in the room and screeched when she mentioned her time there. Did not expect to hear screeches here. After categorically being dragged by Black Twitter, she apologized. But then this same reporter wrote an October article for the Washington Post that began by saying, shortly after Senator Kamala D. Harris became Biden's running mate, the Democratic National Committee began receiving thousands of donations in the precise amount of $19.08 without any obvious explanation. So when I read this, I thought, obvious to who?
Right.
Because it's obvious to anyone who has cultural competence in the significance of Black Greek letter organizations. Obviously, the amount is attributed to the founding year of Harris's sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Do you think that the Biden-Harris win will now mean that mainstream outlets, like the way that they discuss HBCUs, BGLOs, like even understanding what those acronyms even stand for, Divine Nine, do you think that this is going to now impact how mainstream outlets are covering and the cultural competence?
It should be, right? I think that's just a normative and resounding yes. And I write about this in this forthcoming book I have with Oxford University Press that'll come out in February. I have a case study with deltas, with our sorors. And what I do with this deep dive in using this focus group data is if politicians aren't looking at deltas, if they're not looking at alphas and Qs and AKAs and SG rows, they have missed the boat. And it's precisely because these organizations provide women and men with civic skills necessary to behave in politics. And these organizations place a premium on members that can either themselves run for office or support those that run for office. And particularly Delta, if what you don't know about us is our lineage to women's suffrage, and particularly the ways that Black women have been marginalized and othered within white women's organizations to form the vote. The same goes for a majority of HBCUs, right? You are politically socialized at HBCUs to care about Black communities and to learn deeply about them. And you can't leave without having even a tacit knowledge of the role that politics plays in uplifting Black communities. So, I mean, I just shake my head when I think about how tone-deaf politicians have been on particularly this group, because it's an undertapped resource for them, that these organizations have been working politically since their inception. And because these organizations have this upwardly mobile, upwardly economically resourced group, it behooves them, right, to tap into us.
Absolutely. And just for people who are listening who do not know, when Nadia said the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated lineage in women's suffrage, our founders, these were college-age women at Howard University. Their first public act was to march in the Women's Suffrage March of 1913. They had to march in the back.
Right.
They had to march in the back, but they were there. It's interesting because I think a lot of people of all races who are not well-versed in knowledge of HBCUs and Divine Nine culture is that what I think people still don't understand, that the Biden-Harris win didn't only come from Howard and AKAs, but all Black Greek letter organizations and all HBCU students and alum who wanted to support Harris because there's this community and familial aspect that you are indoctrinated in, quite frankly, in these organizations that you do not see in PWI and white Greek culture. I am hoping that this win increases the cultural competence on the importance, to your point, this important study that you're doing in terms of tapping into HBCU alum and students and on culture. You know, another thing that I'm honestly hoping about, do you find that not only when you were a student, even now as a professional, do people ask you, why did you attend Howard?
Oh, girl. They do. They do.
Listen, Kamala Harris is the first woman of any color to be vice president. This is a historic win on many levels. Harvard didn't do that. MIT didn't do that. Stanford didn't do that. Wellesley didn't do that. Howard and HBCU did that. Let's be clear. And actually, the two most prominent women in this presidential story are HBCU grads. Let's be clear.
Yes. And so all of this, Warnock, who is running in Georgia right now, a Morehouse alum.
Let's talk about it.
Right?
Let's talk about it.
This Black vote for Kamala Harris. And so this is really a moment for HBCUs to stand up, for folks that belong to Black-led organizations to see this is what we do, right? We have always produced excellence. It's now the rest of America is coming around to recognize
of all colors. Let's keep it real.
Yes.
Of all colors.
Yeah. And like some of us don't recognize it either. That's a word.
People are like, oh, like you are not going to be able to tell Howard people. You're not going to be able to tell HBCU grads. And people don't understand. No. Yes, Kamala Harris is a Howard grad, but HBCU alum and students feel seen in the same way that when Barack Obama became president, Black people felt seen. And a lot of people don't understand that.
It is not, it's bigger than
Howard and AKAs, yes.
It is so much,
yes.
It is so much bigger than us. And I say this as a Howard alum who is married to a Howard alum who has not taken off a piece of Howard paraphernalia since Saturday.
Right.
I say this as somebody, my mom who is a Delta has been rocking pearls since last Tuesday.
Ma'am, listen,
right?
We are here for it.
Yes, this is a cultural thing. And so there are things about HBCUs that are united throughout, no matter where you went, right? So you have to be part of this culture to understand where people are coming from. So it doesn't matter if you went to FAM, it doesn't matter if you went to Talladega, it don't matter if you went to Morehouse, it doesn't matter if you went to Kentucky State, right?
I actually am hoping that this Biden-Harris win really provides a culture shift, because at the end of the day, she's not the first Black female vice president. She's not the first South Asian female. She is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like several categories. Right. She is checking first. And guess what? That's an HBCU alum.
It is. And I want to put this here, though. The first woman to run for VP was Charlotta Bass, a Black woman. So Kamala Harris is standing on the shoulders of Black women. So when Sarah Palin came out and said, like, welcome to the club, she ain't in it, right? It's not just her. I'll rephrase. It's not just her. And to take anything away from Kamala Harris is just wrong. Instead, what I want to do is expand the narrative, contextualize, right, where she came from, how she got here, and make her seem, while this is an historic win, she is an heir to a legacy that Black women have been building for centuries. I don't want to take this out of context. Even moving far back to our feminist foremothers who ran for office, even before Black women could vote, could actually have their votes counted. But take it up until today, right? 2020, we saw over 130 Black women run for federal office alone. And there's huge, big numbers at state legislators that we can't even count, and city and local officials too. So Kamala Harris is part and parcel of a group of Black women who are empowered to run for office. And I want this part of the narrative to also come out, right? That she is a unicorn in so many ways, but in other ways, she's not, right? She's really following the footsteps of others and are doing the same things of other women. What she's doing differently is being the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman to be elected second highest position in the nation's history. And for that, we will always applaud her.
That is a word. Nadia, thank you so much for your time and for your brilliance. And tell us the name of your forthcoming book.
Sister Style, The Politics of Appearance for Black Women Elected Officials.
And tell us what you're going to be doing at Georgetown.
So I will be a full professor in the Department of Government, and I'll be the director of the Women and Gender Studies program there.
As you know, the podcast is curated by the Iconoclast Dinner Experience. This is my last question. It's your last night on Earth. Where are you eating?
Oh, the Fancy Radish. That is my favorite restaurant in all of the world. It is high-end vegan restaurant. Thankfully, I will be heading to Georgetown in the fall. So I will be in DC again. So I envision eating many more times at the Fancy Radish. They have this smoked tofu that is really good. And then they have these Szechuan noodles that are so spicy. I feel like the good kind of spice for like your nose, just kind of like it's so good, so good.
Thank you for listening to Impolite Conversation, the podcast, curated by the Iconoclast Dinner Experience. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Icon Dinner and on the Iconoclast Dinner Experience Facebook page. Let us know what you thought about this episode. Hit us on socials or send us feedback at press@iconoclastdinner.com. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our podcast, and we'd also love it if you rated and reviewed us.